Hello and welcome to Cookery with Mason Storm. On today's episode we're going to be making mac and cheese. I ran into some problems making my noodles by hand and you'll see that in a little bit. Otherwise they tasted pretty good, so stay tuned. So we're going to begin with making our noodles, and I'm using my standard recipe here. 200 grams of flour and 2 eggs. This will make kind of a smaller dish size of mac and cheese. If you want more, scale it up. Just using my fingers to kind of mix in the eggs at the top here before I slam it down on the desk and provide a more intensive method of mixing the eggs with the flour. There we go. And now for some more intensive mixing. We're just going to keep mixing this until it turns into one cohesive, coherent dough that has a consistent kind of yellowy color to it. Doesn't take too long to do. It's not that big of a deal. I think a lot of people make too big of a thing out of making noodles. It's actually quite easy, and they do taste quite a bit better than the ones you get at the store, the pre-dried noodles. And before you know it, the dough will be ready to go. And you kind of want to knead it for probably like 5 to 10 minutes just to make sure that it's as good as it's going to be. You don't just stop once it starts to look kind of the right way. You go for a little bit longer. And once we're done with our dough here, we're going to just put it in a plastic bag and let it sit aside for 15 minutes. While we're waiting, I'll get the rest of the ingredients ready. So I have a 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper powder, 1/2 teaspoon of paprika, 2 teaspoons of salt, 1 teaspoon of black pepper, 1/2 cup of flour, 1/2 cup of butter, 3 cups of shredded cheddar cheese, and 1.5 cups of half and half cream. And now here we go. Here's the new tool that I got to make extruded pasta. So it's got a cylinder that we hold the pasta in, it's got an end that does the pressing, and a knob that you turn to push it through the end, the die or whatever. So I'm just kind of rolling it out here to see if I can get the dough to fit inside, and I was successful. And then it's simply a matter of cranking down like a madman trying to get the dough to press through on the other end. I thought I would get it all in there all at once, and that would make it easier. That wouldn't have to refill the thing multiple times. Although this thing didn't work as planned. And I have the macaroni end on here, and there we go. The first pressing, the first time it went through, it broke the press. Some of the plastic pieces just kind of broke, and that kind of really sucked. So I'm just gonna cut off the amount of dough that's kind of left over, and I'm going to switch over to a different style of noodle just to see if I can make it through making this, seeing as I have all the ingredients otherwise all measured out. And I'm not just going to abandon my project, abandon my meal. Not going to go hungry from this. So I take it apart and put the other end on and continue on with the project. So now that I have the other end mounted to it, or I will in a second, seeing as I've sped up the footage so much, I'm going to start this thing all over again. And this one's is an all metal insert, so therefore it shouldn't really break. And I just keep pressing it out till I have a few inches of noodles, and then I cut it with a knife. And then I sprinkle flour on them so they don't all join back together and become a giant lump of pasta, because that's what happens with pasta, especially when you're making your own. It really likes to stick to itself. So it's just kind of a little bit of a dusting of flour and rinse and repeat until we have all of our pasta. And now that our pasta's all done and in the bowl and we're all good to go, it's time to move over to our stovetop. So I have a nice big pot filled with water. I'm just going to set it on the burner here, crank the temperature up to maximum, and we're just going to kind of let that do its thing while we make our sauce. So in order to do that, I have a nice saucepan out, and then I'm going for a medium heat, and then we can begin by making a little bit of a roux. So in order to do that, we're going to add our butter into our pan, and we're going to let it melt and melt away. And I'm just going to increase the speed here so our butter melts in a reasonable amount of time. Significantly faster than real time. And we're going to be using a whisk for this project because it works really good at making a roux. So now we're going to add in our flour and we're just going to keep mixing this. We're going to mix it like crazy for the next 2 or so minutes until, well, that's just kind of how long it is when you make a roux. You cook it for that long and that gets rid of a little bit of the flour taste, so then it's just a buttery taste. I think that's kind of the general idea of why it's made for that long. There might be a little bit more to it. I mean, its consistency kind of changes a little bit as well, but I think the big thing is you don't want to have a flour taste. And now that our allotted time has passed, we're going to add in our cream. Then give it a little bit of a quick stir before adding in our different spices and seasonings. So we're just going to dump all those in. And then we're just going to continue to stir this occasionally, maybe even consistently, until it thickens up a little bit. Doesn't take very long. And once we get a good amount of thickening to occur in our sauce, then we're going to melt our cheese into it as well. And that usually takes it up to the next level. And once our cheese is all inside the mix, we can usually just turn the heat off or turn it right down because we don't really need to cook the cheese or anything. But at this point in time, our water is boiling away, so we can add in our noodles and start cooking them. I was thinking of kind of sprinkling them in, that way I don't get all the flour in there, but it sprayed up and touched my fingers a little bit and was a little bit unpleasant, so I ended up just dumping them all in anyway. And with all that flour in there, you won't really be able to see the noodles while I cook it, so I'm just going to cook it for a few minutes till they're al dente, and that's pretty exciting. Of course, it's going to boil over because I wasn't paying enough attention as per usual, and it wouldn't be a Mason Storm cooking video if I didn't spill or drop something at least once. But the noodles were pretty much done at this point anyway, so I just took it off the heat and then shut the heat off, and eventually I drained the noodles out of there and just put them in this little strainer here. Seemed to work out pretty good. And once we're done messing around with our noodles, we have both our sauce ready and our noodles ready, so it's time to assemble. So we're just going to dump in our noodles into the bottom of the pan here. Toss in our sauce, which was a little bit tricky to get in due to the way it really stuck inside the center of the whisk here. So I was able to get that out with a spatula, and then I proceeded to just mix the cheese sauce in with the noodles. And once they were all kind of mixed in, then I proceeded to add the remainder of the cheese on the top of the mac and cheese. So there's 50% in the sauce and 50% on top. And that seems to work out pretty good. And once that's all in there and completed, then we stick it in the oven at 325 degrees and we just bake it till the cheese is nice and melted. So 15 to 20 minutes. And here we are now that it's out of the oven. As you can see, the cheese is all nice and melted, so I'm able to get out my scoop and scoop out a serving of mac and cheese. Although you really can't call it mac and cheese when there's no macaroni in it, but we really tried to make it, so that's that. Let me know if anything like that's happened to you before in the comments, and if you like my content, I'd like to see more of it, please like and subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome.